Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and this is our second episode of The Two Joes. Joe Trippi, Democratic strategist, and with me is my good friend, Joe Klein, who I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself and start the show off.
Yes, I am the sole proprietor of a Substack newsletter called Sanity Clause, named after the great Marx Brothers line, "There ain't no sanity clause," especially nowadays. And in this week's episode, we have a special guest, a good friend of both Joes. And our topic this week is the No Kings protest this weekend. What happened? Where we go from here? How can you expand the movement? And is it a movement? And to start, I would like to go with one of our weekly features, which is called the Quote of the Week. And it comes this week from the brilliant patriot who is our Veterans Affairs Secretary, Doug Collins. And he said on the morning of, he actually texted on the morning of Saturday, the No Kings Protest Day, "Good morning to my fellow Americans who are celebrating No Kings Day. While most of us celebrate this reality on July 4th, you do you." Well, the reason why I quote that isn't because it's scintillating or it's going to change the state of the republic. In fact, for the exact opposite reason. It is an example of what didn't work over the weekend. The attempts by the Trumpers to denigrate the No Kings demonstrations with snark failed miserably. Even King Donald's own AI attempt to portray himself as the king in a fighter jet, dumping sewage on the demonstrators, really seemed kind of off and stupid, especially since I think all three of us were at these demonstrations. To me, the great triumph was that there was no violence anywhere. I was expecting some of the Proud Boy thugs or people like that to come and try and mess things up. But everywhere there were lots and lots of people. They were singing "God Bless America." They were waving American flags. I think there should have been more American flags, but I thought it was generally a success. My one qualification, and there's always going to be a qualification with me, Trippy, is I don't know where it goes from here. And I don't know if this has moved the needle at all. But let me introduce Sam Brown, who is a former great public servant and even greater organizer, who in 1969 helped put 1 million people on the mall to protest the war in Vietnam. And that, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Sam this week was that he was able to build a coalition that expanded beyond the far left and the moderate left, which is where I situated myself in those days, to include the religious community, to include average Americans from all across the spectrum. And I just wanted to get a sense from Sam of how the memory of that compares to what you saw this weekend. And you were at a rather exotic protest on Saturday, weren't you?
Yeah, I was it was very strange. I'm deep in Trump country. I'm in a county in northern Minnesota that Trump carried 60-40. I went to the demonstration. It's a town of 10,000 people, and we had 1,500 people show up, and that's a real 1,500. That's not an organizer's inflated 1,500. There was someone there with a clicker actually counting everyone because just to make sure how many people were there. And it was a remarkable turnout. I have a picture that I took of a guy in an operating engineer's jacket holding an American flag. The pole of the American flag is planted in the back of an electric wheelchair. And the guy sitting in the wheelchair has his U.S. Marine jacket on. There were lots of Viet vets there. I didn't see a lot of people of the age that would have been of Iraq or Afghan vets, but there were a lot of people with their caps and camouflage and I'm a proud vet caps on, a lot of American flags, and a lot of goodwill. I mean, people were laughing and joking and happy to be there. It was just a genial crowd. And that, there's a bunch of studies that about sort of where things begin to matter. And the best of those studies is that something like in a community, if like 20 out of for every 1,000 population, if there are 20 in the county or the area, if there are 20 demonstrators for every 1,000 people, that's a huge turnout. And this was like 30 in this middle of this Trump country. So it was very different than you might have expected. And uh, and Joe goes back to something we've talked about before, that my view that none of this really matters until it begins to matter in Trump country.
Mm.
The Manhattan, fine.
But I don't think there was any, the pre-sale of these was all people who hated America and all in the snark. Pretty hard to do that with people who are chanting USA, USA and singing God Bless America and a veteran with a flag in his wheelchair. It's just, I don't think that's going to, that didn't work at all. And of course, the fighter jet motif of Trump dumping sewage on people, it just totally missed the mark. I think so. The real thing, Sam, I was interested in is I know in the past, I think Joe's told me that you thought like, hey, get farmers tractors in the mall. I mean that how do you if you were trying to organize the next round, because I think part of it is each round as each round gets bigger and gets more of Trump country involved, that's when I think you're right, will have an impact. How did you do that back then, and what would be some of the things you would try to do now?
Well, there are a couple of things. One thing I think, Joe, is that things sort of have to marinate a bit. The timing has to be right. People have to get there. I've said to the other Joe Klein that
I'm the other Joe.
You're the other Joe. Okay, well, I've said to both Joes. I will say now. I will say now to both Joes that people need a sort of easy on ramp. They need to feel like they're going someplace where they'll be comfortable. It's not easy for somebody who's never gone to a demonstration or who's sort of a little ambivalent. They need to have a feeling that there's a crowd there that they're comfortable with. They're not surrounded by crazies. And in that sense, I think the No Kings people have been brilliant in doing this widespread. Let's not do 1 million people on the mall. Let's do 2,500 demonstrations, including in a lot of Trump counties. I think it's brilliant work, and it's a first step. But I think when I said it needs to marinate, I mean that people need to feel it in their own lives. When the farmers can't sell their crops because the Chinese aren't buying anymore, but are buying from Brazil or Argentina instead, that's when it begins to cut. When the farmers in the Central Valley in California can't pick their crops because they don't have the workers, that's when it begins to cut. And that's when I think we begin to move the needle in Trump country. And as I said, my favorite would be the yellow vest. It's 200 tractors surrounding the state capitol in Lincoln, with farmers saying, this guy's killing us.
You've modified the idea. It used to be tractors on the mall in Washington, but I think that this is a better idea. Tractors around every state capitol.
Yeah, that's a much more appealing, it seems to me. Also, it's a long ways from Iowa to the mall on a tractor.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, Sam is from Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is the real Iowa. It isn't like the urban metropolis of Des Moines.
Yeah, right.
Sam, back in the day, how did you overcome the reluctance of the more moderate people, the church folks, and so on? I know that you were a divinity student, but one of the things you were known for was your ability to deal with the really angry people on the left and the really moderate people who had become disgusted with the war.
I,
And
I
are
would,
there lessons there for what's going on now?
yeah, probably. I think our biggest breakthrough, unions were more important in 1969 than they are now. The percentage of workers who actually belonged to unions was substantially higher. And the UAW was a particularly important union with a long time sort of progressive leadership, but with a worker base that was not so progressive. And I would say our biggest successes were convincing the Ruthers that we were responsible people, that they could endorse this without the risk that there was going to be blowback in the sense of violence and crazy rhetoric from the speakers and stuff that would make them and their workers feel uncomfortable. So, we always had, I mean, just on the union front, we always had the little lefty unions, the leather workers and upholsterers and a bunch of those.
UE.
The furriers, yeah, the UE. But to get to the mainstream unions, the real breakthrough was to get the UAW uh, and to get their board to endorse it, which they did, and
Oh,
that made it more comfortable for other people. And in the churches, there was this group called I'll think of it in a second. In any case, it was Abram Herschel and Bill Coffin and some of the usual suspects, but there was a guy who really organized those churches, a guy by the name of Dick Fernandez, who organized the church leadership, and that moved the needle with a lot of people. I think we never really got to the evangelicals, which seemed to be the core of the Trump religious group. We never really got to them. We only got to, the Methodists and Presbyterians and Jews and the sort of centrist Catholics, the sort of old Dorothy Day Catholics. But it did give us a sense that you had churches, you had unions, you had obviously various civil rights groups because that was the time. Uh, but it was really making it people feel that, like they knew it was safe. They knew that there wasn't going to be violence, that there'd be other reasonable people, and that the language would not be, we were not going to take on every issue that faced the country. We were focused on a single issue, which I think the No King's Day people have done brilliantly as well. I mean, really brilliantly.
Well, that is sort of what's happened, right? I mean, the first No Kings, I think, brought in around 4 to 5 million people, and there was the same kind of thing. People got it was. I remember kind of 2 or 3, so I don't know how many years now of No King. I mean, how many No Kings there's been, but each of them has been kind of a festival almost. At least the ones I've been, in terms of like there's nothing going on that would make anybody want to stay away. And so far, each of them has gotten progressively bigger. Again, I think the last one was 5 million. This one was 7 million. Part of as an organizer, I think of like a simple message is if you went this time and you brought 2 people, go next time and bring 4. I mean, if all of us sort of did that, I mean, and convince them between now and the next one about why they can be comfortable, why they should, a friend, a family member, a coworker, to talk them, and even if it takes buying them lunch on the way there. But I mean, I think there is like
Donuts for all.
well, no, but I think this does get back to Joe's question about, is it a movement? And I think it is, but you got to keep that movement going. And is it more from my organizer perspective? Or are you saying it's more as the heat gets tougher on people like farmers, et cetera, or both of those things that are needed.
I think both those things. I think that is that you need people to be open to the message, and then you need an organization that's open to new people. That it can't be, if it becomes cult-like, if you begin to take on every issue in the world, you just destroy. It seems to me it destroys it. I will tell you a charming story about Walter Reuther after the meeting with the board, and he was concerned that we didn't know how things were going to go. We were walking out of their retreat up in Michigan. He put his arm around my shoulder and he said, Sam, when I go to the dentist, I reach over and I grab him by the balls. And then I say to him, we're not going to hurt each other, are we? And I said, Mr. Reuther, I understand the message. And no, we're going to protect you. We're not going to do anything stupid that's going to make you embarrassed about what you did. So,
For those of our listeners who were born in the 21st century or even in much of the late 20th century, Walter Reuther was a legendary leader of the United Auto Workers and organizer of it. And he was the guy who started the sit-down strikes in Detroit in the 1930s that successfully organized the UAW and was known as a kind of labor statesman as he got older. A very responsible guy. And a guy who was worshipped. But as I hear this, Sam, I remember 1970. I remember being there. I remember feeling just great. We all felt just great. And then a lot of us went on to the McGovern campaign in 1972, and a lot of us felt really just great that for the first time, an insurgent candidate had overcome, the powers of the Democratic Party back when they used to have powers in the Democratic Party. And then we had the election of 1972 and we lost. And famously, Pauline Kael, who would be ground zero for this sentiment, who was the film critic for The New Yorker, said, I don't understand how Nixon won. I didn't know anybody who voted for him. And so the question is, how do we move this toward 2026 and then 2028? It's a start. It's a start in the right direction. And the most promising things, as I said, were the fact that there was no violence and that all the attempts to denigrate it failed. But you need more than that. And I think this is what Trippi was getting at.
Well, it seems to me that Joe Trippi, your comment that it's both those things. Yeah, you need to bring your friends, but we also need to be thinking about more broadly about what we do. And I think that the question is, can we convert those 5 million or 7 million or however many million people into people who will actually work on the midterm elections next year, assuming we have midterm elections and assuming that there's some real opportunity to have fair elections, which seems increasingly North Carolina today, I see, stole another seat, and Louisiana will probably steal a few more. But assuming there's an election and assuming there's a real opportunity for Democrats, the question is, can we convert those 5 million people to door knockers? And if so, we win the election.
So if you were sitting in the room with the No Kings organizers now, what suggestions would you make to them for how they should go ahead from here specifically?
Well, I think it's a delicate question for them because the Democratic Party is so discredited that if what they are seen as being is just sort of a voice for the Democratic Party, okay, now thank you for coming out. Now go vote Democratic. it sounds a little instrumentalist or like you're kind of using them. I mean, I think I'm sure all those people will vote for Democrats, but um, it's very hard until people feel better about the Democratic Party to get people to actually move there. But what I would say is that they're going to need to begin to move in the spring sometime, maybe not the next demonstration, but the one after that, assuming there'll be, every 2, 3 months, uh, to move it to politics. If you don't move it to the election, it, well, it makes everybody feel good, and you can't be othered, and so you don't feel like you're alone, and that alone has value, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't translate into, it seems to me, into electoral politics.
One of the things I
That's
think
both
that's
you guys.
one of the things I think that's happened here. I mean, one of the things that they've broken through with No Kings is, look, Trump administration and most authoritarians, like, run on fear, right? It's like, don't come out. I'm putting troops in the street. We got ICE out there. You don't want to show up at anything because we may grab you. And I mean, and there was no fear. What I mean by that is this was 7 million people, even with the basic rap on them is you're going to see a bunch of hateful America haters out there, and clearly, you know, it wasn't just snark, it was a little bit of intimidation. But what I think happened was, hey, 7 million people said screw that, didn't go out angry or anything. But when, I mean, obviously there's animus, but did it peacefully and love America. And I think that's got to get broken down, because what I think is going to happen, I mean, what we all fear is that, ICE is in front of ballot boxes claiming to keep them free of illegal votes from immigrants that should be shipped out of the country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and trying to dampen and intimidate people to not come out. And I think part of what you're saying is, well, or I think is happening, is the number of people gives credence the next time that I don't have anything to worry about, I can come out too. I think there's got to be a, but I also think, as you're talking about this, Sam, that the idea I have about how to, how I would organize, how to grow it, does translate in spring to, at those rallies, signing people up to work in their precincts, to start knocking on doors and talking to people, not as partisans, but just as Americans, on why they want people to be engaged and why this is important and why we have to fight this. Could turn into a very powerful political organization. It's strategic, get out the vote and actually convince people, one-on-one, always, everything I've ever done was much more powerful. A neighbor talking to you is much more powerful than than millions of dollars of TV ads. And I think this could be the basis for growing that, hopefully next year.
I agree
Yeah,
with that.
I think that that's a great idea. The next one should be the sign-up sheet demonstration.
Yeah, that's sign up to do something, and here's the
Yeah.
things we need to
Well,
do. And
sign up to support a candidate.
yeah,
Let me, the next big political thing that's going to happen is the election. And we have three big races, all of which the Democratic Party can win. But that might not be the best possible thing for the future of the Democratic Party. What happens if Zohran Mamdani wins in New York, and the two moderate candidates for governor in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, also win, but win narrowly? What do you think the effect of these elections are going to be on the No Kings movement and on the grassroots?
Look, I think those of us who follow all these elections so carefully probably get a little much in the weeds. If Mamdani wins in New York, the they're going to go after him and say all these Democrats are a bunch of radical lefty crazy socialists and so on and so forth. And nobody is really going to pay any attention to that. It's New York. And it's New York. Forget it. And I'm hopeful that in New Jersey and Virginia that we actually win by pretty good margins, because that would be energizing. But I don't think the Mondami thing, he's probably going to win, and I don't think I don't think the sky is falling, Joe Klein, as you do.
Well, I don't think it's a good thing. And what I do see is the
You're
way,
making both of us feel very uncomfortable, Joe. I just want you to know that.
well, that's what I'm here for. I mean, how many Democrats actually were in favor of defunding the police? 6.5. But the Republicans used that against the party very, very effectively. All you need is one Zoran Mamdani. But I want to raise a different issue, which is the fact that it seems that both of the gubernatorial races are getting closer.
Closer, yeah.
And the issue that is cutting against both women is, guess what? Same old. The trans issue, which in the real world is becoming more and more irrelevant, because there are all a new crop of statistics showing that fewer and fewer kids are interested in that. But it's working in these campaigns. How would you deal with that?
Well, I think I'm more where Sam is in that, and that'll be a big shock to you, Joe. But that look, I don't think Mondani couldn't win in Virginia, and I don't think I wouldn't be shocked if Abigail Spanberger couldn't win a race for mayor of New York. I mean, I think it's interesting to me that everybody's worried about him. No, but I'm saying that everybody's worried about him. And the reality is, if you're actually looking for what messages or what kind of messengers would work in the battleground states and in places like Iowa, Michigan, it's the Mickey Sherrills and the Abigail Spanbergers, and I believe that those communities will end up nominating people who come from that community and appeal to those people. And it'll be hard to stick a Mondami on them, much like I think it may be harder today to tell people that the No Kings rallies are full of people who hate America. I mean, there's a campaign, and I think we're having really good candidates out there. And Mondami might be the right candidate to be the mayor of New York. We don't know. We'll see. And I'm with you that they will certainly take things and use it to demonize others. But I'm not sure that's going to work this time around.
As a native of Queens, I don't know that Mamdani will win Queens. And if you had an archetypal New York borough that means something to the New York's impact on the rest of the country, it would be Queens. It's a borough with a lot of working class people, a lot of cops and firefighters, and it'll be really interesting to see. Trump did a lot better. He didn't win Queens in 2024, but he nearly did, and that would be what I'm going to be looking at on election night.
And Andrew Cuomo is your Donald Trump correlative?
Well.
Yeah, it wasn't.
But if he wins it, that proves that Donald Trump can win it.
There is Andrew Cuomo, who I've known forever.
I know, and you like him.
At this point, is a very leaky garbage barge of a candidate carrying an
that's what I'm
awful lot
saying.
of baggage.
It's like it's hard to argue that Mondami is like rolling over like giants, and brilliant. I mean, it's a flawed field for a bunch of different reasons. And I think trust the people of New York. They're going to vote or not. And I do think that you can count on Republicans, by the way, probably demonizing whoever the hell it is that wins. If it's Andrew Cuomo, oh yeah, it'll be, come on. So I just, look, that's the one thing you can count on, that they're going to demonize use whoever it is to as a poster child to somehow attack somebody in Iowa who's running for Congress in Iowa District 3. But I just don't think that that's going to have much impact this time around. And maybe, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think people are focused enough on prices, on the economy, and other things that it's also different running those kind of worries and using them against an incumbent party like Harris was representing at the time, and now it's on the other foot in terms of, I think people really are starting to really question the tariffs and some of the, and particularly as we're talking with how the farmers are being hurt and things like that. I'm not sure that the telling them that Mandami in New York City is the whole reason for why they're doing so bad. For why their tractors are not in the fields is not going to be a salient point to make. We'll see.
Well, let's hope their tractors are at the state houses next time.
Yeah.
So Joe, you have another one of our features is the stat of the week. And I leave that to Mr. Trippi, who reads polls better than almost anyone.
Well, this gets something that Sam brought up towards the beginning. There is something called the 3.5 rule, that when 3.5% of the population of a country protests nonviolently against the government, that government changes and changes course and can lose power. There have been several different cases of this throughout history. I'm not going to go into all of them, but it's a pretty, solid number. It's got to be, so in the United States, that would be 12 million people. And when you see what's happening, with the growth of No Kings from 5 million to 7 million, that's roughly 2% of the population already out there. And so, look, that's my stat of the week, our stat of the week. And I think it really does say that getting out there, using your voice, not in anger, but in the sort of the fun atmosphere that most of those protests took place. And I agree with Sam too that doing this in 2,500 different communities and expanding it deeper into more communities and if we can do that and get to 12, 13, 14 million, I think we're going to have a much bigger impact than we think. But that's our stat of the day, and that's the 3.5 rule.
Well, one of our diversions here at the Two Joes is that we like to entertain ourselves and each other by telling old stories, of which we have more than a couple. And when I hear about the 3.5% rule, I think of another rule called the Mad Dog Principle, which was promulgated by me and Hunter Thompson, who was an old friend of Sam's. Sam spent a lot of his life in Colorado. And this was back in the 1970s. And we were in a bar with Timothy Krause, the great Rolling Stone journalist. In fact, all three of us were Rolling Stone journalists at that point. And Tim Krause was talking about how when he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, about half the dogs had rabies, so that whenever you saw a dog coming at you, you ran in the other direction. And I, in my insidious fashion, asked Hunter, what percentage of dogs would have to not have rabies for you not to run in the other direction? And we started the bidding at around 38. Hunter was, as usual, in an altered state of consciousness. 27, no. Hunter, who didn't move his lips very much, said, not for me. 23%, 15%, 12%. We're still running in the other direction. We get down to 5%. And maybe then we wouldn't run in the other direction. And I forgot that story until I found myself in Iraq years later with about 5% of the population up in arms against the U.S. Invasion, which made me realize that, number one, the Mad Dog Principle was a law of nature, at least in that case. And number two, we were in a hell of a lot of trouble in Iraq. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I was in Iraq, and I had one of those things where the U.S. we're going through checkpoints, and the Iraqis and the U.S. were pointing their guns at each other. We're on the same side. And I was like, yeah, this is like not good. You could tell it wasn't really going to work out over the long haul. But Sam, thank you so much for being with us today. It's great for you to join the two Joes. And so for the other Joe, I'll ring us out. Joe, why don't you again give the sanity clause and where they can go find more on you?
Weirdly enough, you can find Sanity Clause at Joseph Klein Substack.com. Substack, aside from my mother, is the only person who ever called me Joseph. But there you have it. And you, Joe, you have a plethora of ways to be accessed, don't you?
Yeah, but the one that Trippi show is a podcast I do with my co-host Alex Sashlow. It's more in the nitty gritty of different races, and I also talk occasionally about technology. But more than anything, go to Lincoln Square on Substack. This is a Lincoln Square show. There's other great Lincoln Square podcasts and shows. And writing, great writing, and also along with Sanity Clause, of course, because I always enjoy reading Joe. And most of the time I agree with him, but occasionally we cross paths. But we'll probably do several of those at some point on this show.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Sam. This was great.
Yeah.
Thanks to both of you. This was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.